Andrew Davis here with the men of the hour. In my mind, Attorney General Alan Wilson, Prosecutor Creighton Waters. I guess just start with that moment. What's your feeling right now? You're sort of doing the tour and talking to people for the first time about all these things.
First feeling is elation. Second feeling, going 100 miles an hour, now what? But I'm so proud of Creighton and the prosecution team and the law enforcement agencies that supported us, like SLED and Colleton County and the FBI, Secret Service and on. Just really appreciate all of their efforts and really kudos, hats off to the men and women of the Attorney General's office.
Creighton, we were talking about, hundreds and hundreds of hours of work that you put in. That moment when you heard the word guilty, can you explain it all?
I think it was a little bit different than I expected because I was probably less nervous waiting for this verdict than I had been for others. And I think it was just that we had worked so hard and so long and had just put everything on the table. And so I think really for the team, and again, this was a team effort as you saw, everybody, the folks that work in state grand jury, our law enforcement partners, SLED, Colleton County, they all did amazing work. But I think all of us are still just kind of numb. We haven't had a chance to really let it sink in. But the most important thing, of course, is not how we feel. It's just that there was a voice for Maggie and Paul. There was accountability for Alex Murdaugh, and the jury spoke, and we're obviously very thankful for that.
The nerves factor for both of you, though, you felt like after closing that you had done your job properly and you looked at that jury and felt you had it?
Absolutely, 100%. Pour your blood, sweat, and tears, your life into something for 18 months. And again, I'm speaking as the guy that runs the agency. They lived it every day. And but I quickly bought into how important, how big this was, because one of the things that we've been hearing for a long time is that people didn't feel like because of who he was, what his name was, that he would be held accountable. There are people down in this area of the state, there are people all over the state who feel like there are certain people who are just above the law. The one message that we wanted to send in this case, and we'll send it in other cases too, is that no one is above the law, no matter what your station is in life.
Yeah. I think, for me, though, the reason why I wasn't nervous wasn't overconfidence or anything like that. I think just in this instance, this has been such a long process that I felt comfortable with leaving it in the jury's hands. Trial lawyers can be pretty superstitious. I don't like to think about the verdict, talk about the verdict, or anything like that. But I knew that I and the team, we had looked those jury in the eye. I knew Alec had done the same thing, and I felt confident that they would know that he had lied to them when he did that, and that would be a deciding factor.
What about that? You guys put egos aside and said this is a team effort with everything you did. Everybody took part in this, including yourself. Alex sat up there and said, this is my ego, I'm going to get on the stand and try to turn that jury. Do you believe that was the turning point in this case?
Well, this is a guy who made his entire career, successful career, making millions of dollars, standing in front of juries, giving closing arguments, and getting juries to believe him. And in my mind, I believe that when he took the stand, that this was his last closing argument, and that the way he had manipulated everyone for years and lied to people for years, he believed that he could do that from this stand. And Creighton did an incredibly effective job of cross-examining him, letting Alec talk. I'll let Creighton speak for himself, but did a masterful job. And Alec looked at the jurors, and I think they saw right through it.
Yeah, that cross was a tough draw, but I knew it was coming. I knew Alec couldn't resist it. Just my assessment of him. The second the defense put in an exhibit, I knew he was going to testify. And this is a different type of cross-examination. I wanted to start constructively with him. I wanted to get him talking because I knew that he was going to believe in his ability to tell them lies, but I also felt confident that the more I could get him to talk, the longer I could get him to talk, he would eventually lie right in front of that jury, and that would be significant to them. So that's the reason why I would let him talk. While there would be long pauses because he couldn't help himself. He'd start talking, and he ended up hanging himself up a little bit. And if the jurors had any question, that ended up confirming as they watched the man lie to them to their faces.
Yeah, his story changed multiple times during that testimony after he came up with the tears and everything else. Or I guess they said, actually, jurors I talked to said they never saw any actual cheers, just that snot or whatever you want to call it that was coming down his face.
I'll tell you something, and Creighton made a note of this, but something I noticed is that when you look at the timeline, he was there 2 minutes before the presumptive murders or the murders were committed, literally 2 minutes before he in his timeline goes back to take a nap. And I'm thinking to myself, these jurors are sitting there. If my wife and son are brutally murdered 2 minutes after I leave the house, and I'm going to be saying, why didn't I stay? Why wasn't I there? If only. And he never said that. That really was powerful to me.
That was a huge point you made, and it was absolutely true when you brought that back again too, Creighton. I think that was a huge point to say. And he never touched them, grabbed them. I said, as a parent myself, I would grab my child and I'd be holding on to them so there'd be blood all over me, I'm sure. But the fact I didn't touch them, I'm still confused.
I think, you always have to be careful about how people would react in a situation like that. But one thing I think the jury saw was nothing about his behavior was authentic. And then when they knew who he really was, and that really no one who thought that they were close to him really knew who he was, whether his family, his friends, his law partners. I think the lack of authenticity, the lack of true emotion there came through, and you can see it in his eyes.
Another thing that we got a lot, people would say to me on the street is, what would make a man brutally murder his wife and his son? People can believe a spouse can kill a spouse, but murdering your child, of course we forget about Susan Smith, but what could make a person brutally butcher their child? And what we told people in court, and what John Murdaughs closed with, is what I've been saying all along, is that I believe in his mind, in his own warped way, he loved Maggie and Paul, but he loved himself more. Yeah. And that murdering them was the price that he was willing to pay in order to preserve his way of life and his personal legacy. And that's what it boiled down to for me.
Interesting, too, that nobody absolutely... Sorry, somebody was behind us there. What was interesting is no one stood up to speak for him. No one stood up on either side, which was interesting in its own way. I mean, obviously it's a mixed family at that point, so it's tough to get Maggie's family involved, but I'm surprised that maybe none of his family wanted to speak out.
Well, again, I said this in sentencing. This is a very complicated situation, and I want to be clear, this family has suffered. And we can't forget that this case is about Maggie and Paul, and it's also about the family that remains, that have suffered through this and have suffered through it in a very public way. And so we wanted to be sensitive to that. We were sensitive to that in its entirety. But I think you have to, as you look at that, whether it's on our side or their side, this is a very complicated family situation. And it's not surprising that no one wanted to become part of this at this point in time.
Public side was certainly on your side. Heard applause when you guys came out. I mean, it's not what you do, but it's always interesting, I'm sure, when you get to the point of you guys became celebrities in your own way because of what you did, but because of the justice that you were fighting for as well.
Well, people wanted to believe that justice would prevail. They wanted to believe it, but they didn't know. And I don't think they were applauding for us. I think they were applauding because their hope, their faith in the system was renewed. And I don't ever read social media, but someone sent me a screenshot of his social media, how people were fist pumping and pumping their arms when we were in trial, watching this like it was the Super Bowl, because they needed to believe that justice would prevail at the end of the day, and I think that's what they were excited about.
I agree with that. I've had people in the community come up, and that was really the theme of what we heard, was that they never thought that this day would come just because of all the circumstances and the history, and that's not why this case happened, because of what Alec did. But I think people had questions about whether or not the justice system would operate. And like I said yesterday, I think South Carolina really showed the nation and the world how the process can work despite all those factors.
That's incredibly important too, I think, for South Carolina to say, look at us, we're not some, if someone would say backwoods state or something, right. We went here and made justice happen as well.
Correct.
No, absolutely. And I mean, listen, our state was at the center of the world for a few weeks, and I'm proud to say that everyone I've spoken to from around the country is so happy and pleased. The way this community embraced us, and when I say us, I mean everyone that came from out of town, the people at the hotel we were staying, the restaurant, walking down the street, walking up saying thank you for what you're doing. I mean, it just, even though we were away from our families, I kind of felt like I was at a second home.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I actually accidentally called it home when we were going to the hotel the other day. So, but I'm ready to, this community's been great. The people have been great. They really have taken care of us. But we certainly are ready to get back home for a little while.
I think you told me you're bringing your family to vacation to Walterboro.
That's right. Yeah, I just have to go back to the same hotel room.
You have to show them all the places you've been, which are the hotel room and the courtroom. So,
but here's the Mexican restaurant. Here's the Chinese restaurant.
I think we've all been to all of them now, but we do thank Walterboro for everything. So, for you guys both, I mean, this moment now that it's over, you can look back. What is this going to mean for now and in the future? Is there any way to look at it, or are we too close to it right now?
I mean, I think we still have a lot of work to do. And again, there's a lot of pending white-collar charges, and a lot of that underlying information came up in this trial, but they still have to be addressed, and he deserves a fair trial for those and a presumption of innocence, and we plan to do that. And then, in state grand jury, we have a lot of other bad guys. We got drug cartels and corrupt officials and complex white collar and all sorts of things that are our normal caseload, and those need to be addressed as well. So we'll take a little time to breathe, and then we'll get back to the work of trying to bring justice in South Carolina.
By the way, if people complain that there aren't any more indictments coming out with public corruption or something, the entire state grand jury staff was sitting for 6 weeks in this courtroom. We don't have an army of people. We have a lot of amazing men and women in the other prosecution section that don't do the state grand jury. They're out there. We had a major murder conviction last week, another that no one talked about as much as this case.
Yeah.
There are real lives being destroyed around South Carolina, and there's so many other men and women in our office, in the AG's office, that are doing so much to protect and defend South Carolina citizens, make this a great place to live, work, and raise your family, and hats off to them as well.
Absolutely, and again, I can't say enough about this team. It's because of all that experience we have doing state grand jury cases that the staff that I'm fortunate enough that the general allows me to lead and work with did so well at this, and also that partnership with SLED, which is also part of the state grand jury, that was a big part as well. So I don't want to leave out my law enforcement partners and how crucial they were in their excellent job.
Every time I called Mark Hill, every time I called Sheriff Buddy Hill down here, or called any law enforcement leader, they dropped what they were doing and they said, done. And they gave us the resources and the staff that we needed. And sometimes it's hard to do that. When I was asking last night at the press conference, who from SLED, I need a list of everyone, and one of the agents said, the entire agency.
Yeah.
I mean, if I started listing people,
Sure.
I would.
Look at the witness list. You had pretty much everybody from SLED on the witness list.
Yeah, we should have just made a list of people at SLED who weren't going to testify and everyone else come. But in all seriousness, I think this is a time in my career as the Attorney General where things change, where our agencies understand the big picture, where people realize that, what we do matters, and if we work together, we can really instill, renew people's faith in the criminal justice system and remind people that no one is above the law. When I ran for Attorney General, I had been a career prosecutor, and I had one of the defense attorneys up here say, I didn't realize you were a real lawyer. And it was kind of a backhanded compliment. I took it as a compliment, but being able to be in the courtroom and doing what I used to love doing all the time before I had to take over the entire agency just really reminded me of why I love being a prosecutor, why I love being a public servant. This is really what it's about, serving our community.
Another one with his boss?
Hey, let's go do a murder, man. I'm all in. Boom.
Alan Wilson, Creighton Waters, that's all you need. They're going to do another one. Be careful out there, South Carolina.